Welcome to the Texas Values Report. This is Jonathan Saenz, president of Texas Values. Great to be with you on another glorious week in the state of Texas. You know, there's some big news coming out of our state, but there's a lot of big news on the national level because one of the largest entities that deals with college sports has announced that they're no longer going to allow men and women's sports if they ever did. They're just making it clear in their policy. The NAIA, which has about 200 colleges and universities that are a part of its authority, if you will, with thousands, 83,000 students that are a part of these programs and universities and collegiate athletes, announced earlier this week that they have a clear policy that it's pretty clear. If you're biological male, you don't compete in women's sports. And if you're taking any testosterone and you're a female, you're not going to be competing in women's sports. This is long overdue, but they are one of the biggest and major college sports entities that has come out and made this definitive statement, while a lot of the other ones have sort of been very gray or confusing about their policy, which is going to further put pressure on the NCAA, who's also facing a new lawsuit regarding these issues. We did a Facebook Live and press conference, if you will, about that issue and court case coming out of the state of Georgia. And we continue to see more and more momentum on this issue and concern, and the Biden administration continues to try to make a lot of mistakes and make the decision for everybody by trying to rewrite Title IX and having problems doing that as well. But check out our website for that information. And but look, there's a lot of focus on what's happening at the state level because we're going into runoff elections towards the end of May. Obviously, there's a lot of stuff going on our border, but there's a lot of question about who's going to be the next Speaker of the House because our current Speaker of the House is in a very contested runoff for his own primary. So we're going to have a hearty discussion about that today, because as well as the gender modification issue, the work that continues to be done and the information we find out about how harmful it is for kids to receive these puberty blockers, sex change operations, and a whole host of things that we know can be very dangerous. Our guest today on the Texas Values Report is Representative and Chairman Tom Oliverson. He has certainly been a guest before on the show and is one of the strongest and established leaders in our Texas House. He comes out of the northwest part of Harris County, greater Tomball area, representing District 130. He's been in that district as its state representative since the 85th legislature, so he's got 4 sessions under his belt and established himself quite well as one of the leading anesthesiologists in the state and in the country, and quite a large practice across the country that he's been leading. He's been the chair of insurance, the vice chair, and now, I guess, the chair of the House Republican Caucus. Chairman Oliverson, welcome to the Texas Values Report.
Thank you, Jonathan. It's an honor to be with you again, as always. Glad to see you.
Well, I mean, look, you could just be going back to work and, providing for your family and having some good income, because I know you make a lot of sacrifices during the legislative session. And I'm not saying you're not doing any of that. We had a nice little off-the-air conversation about anesthesia, because my son went through that recently with, as you accurately stated, a wisdom tooth extraction. And but look, I mean, there's a lot of things going on this year, and you're right in the middle of that. Since we finished the Republican in the primary elections earlier in March, some races are going to a runoff, including Dade Phelan, who has been pushed to a runoff by David Covey. As many people know, the brother of Jonathan Covey, who is our policy director. But I do think there was trouble brewing even before Dade Phelan got pushed to a runoff. So I want to talk about a couple issues today with Dr. Oliverson. But before we do, I know you've been on the show a couple of different times during the legislative process, last session and others. But tell our listeners and viewers a little bit about yourself and why you ran for office to begin with.
Yeah, so I ran for office because I felt at the time that God was calling me to public service. And this wasn't something that I looked forward to. It's certainly not been a lifelong goal of mine to be an elected official. I don't look at it as a career thing. I really, truly look at it as a ministry. I was sitting here thinking, as you were talking about all the things that I've gotten myself into lately. The reality is when I prayed about it and I said, God, I'm willing to serve if that's what you want me to do. Just point me in the right direction, which he did. I never really asked him specifically what that would all entail. and I've continued to just essentially do the next right thing before me and leave the outcome up to him. So um, he certainly got me doing a lot right now, more than I really thought I would do when I got into this. But I continue to serve in order, as I see it, to do his will and to serve him by serving my fellow man, and that's what I'm here for. I'm not here for me, and I'm not here for because I need something to do. I'm just here to serve.
Well, look, if you were just talking about the work you were involved in last session, there'd be plenty to discuss, and your name has likely been in the news. The House author of Senate Bill 14, which was the bill that protects kids from puberty blockers and surgical procedures, gender modification, as some people call it, a lot of irreversible processes and procedures that we know, thankfully, because of the testimony in the House and the Texas Senate, we got to hear information making it very clear how dangerous those procedures can be. That was a huge bill that you led the effort to get passed. There was an effort to do it the session before, didn't get there. Unfinished business. And sometimes that can be more difficult because people are waiting, they're expecting, there's a target on the piece of legislation, if you will, from the opposition. And you got it done, and you got it done well. And in the process of getting that done, you were able to attract a lot of your colleagues that maybe wouldn't have gotten on board, including at least one Democrat who, is sort of fighting for her life now to get reelected as a Democrat, in large part because of her common sense stance and support of Senate Bill 14. But, a lot of what happens in the House and getting bills passed is who is in that speaker's chair. And so a couple of weeks ago, after it was, made obvious and public to everyone that because of the election results that our current sitting Speaker of the House, Dade Phelan, was getting pushed to a runoff. And he wasn't even the top vote getter out of the two. David Covey got the most votes in that runoff. It certainly sent the message to a lot of people, well, one way or another, there's probably going to be another speaker. I mean, with the current Speaker of the House barely surviving his primary challenge, and he may not come May. Here you are making this big announcement, really in the same building that Texas Public Policy Foundation was having an event that was already getting a lot of attention, and you announced that you had filed paperwork and you're declaring yourself a candidate for the Speaker of the House. I want to talk about why it was necessary for you to do that. But I also, before we get to the reasons and the concerns about Dade Phelan that you mentioned, what was that day like for you? Because there were a lot of media there. I was able to scoot over there very quickly when I saw us talked about on social media. But what was that day like for you, getting up that morning knowing that's what you were about to do?
Well, I probably should begin by saying that my week actually began on a Sunday night. I had to fly to Phoenix to meet with the National Association of Insurance Commissioners, their leadership, to talk about the direction that we're going in some of the issues that we're having in insurance. Because one of my other roles right now is I am the president of the National Organization of State Lawmakers that deals with all insurance matters across all 50 states. And so I had to be there for that. I flew back on Monday, and then Tuesday morning I got up and I flew to Washington, D.C. to give some prepared remarks before the Congressional Executive Commission on China in response to a bill that Senator Lois Kolkhorst and I worked on, which you guys also supported, which basically opted the state of Texas out of anybody's insurance paying for an organ transplant in China because, as you know, all of those donations are not donations. They're forcibly taken from political prisoners of conscience, most of whom are religious minorities who are imprisoned because their belief system doesn't line up with communism. So that I flew back on Wednesday afternoon after I got done speaking, and then, of course, got up and drove in on Thursday. So that was a jam-packed week for me, and it kind of went by in a blur and very quickly. And I'll be honest, I mean, it's not easy to stand up and to just say, hey, time out here. I think we may have missed something on election day. I think the electorate is calling for us to change the way we're doing things. And if nobody else is going to stand up and say something, which apparently nobody was, I felt like I had to. It was so clear to me that the people that voted in the Republican primary in March were asking for a different direction for the House to go globally. that we needed a new direction and a new leader, and a new leadership. And really, what I would say is really a true paradigm shift. We're not talking about just having a new captain of the ship. What I laid out on that Thursday was a bold new vision, a direction where the majority party actually functions for the first time as a majority, where essentially it's not dependent, the leadership team is not dependent on Democrats in order to be in control and in power. And sort of that frees us from the obligation of having to give all these spoils out to the minority party, including chairmanships and other things that slow down our ability to get priorities done that are important to the people of Texas.
Well, they're absolutely important. We're talking with Dr. Tom Oliverson, Chairman Tom Oliverson. He has a lot of titles that come before his name and after. I'm sure he's also been very involved with the National Association of Christian Lawmakers and a lot of leadership positions that he's had that have a lot to do with his Christian faith. And so I think there were a lot of people that I won't say took by surprise, but they didn't see their day, including your announcement. But very quickly, people got over there and got assembled. And many of the media were already there in the building because the Texas Public Policy Foundation event draws a lot of attention itself. But there was a tremendous amount of interest in your press conference and your announcement. A couple of things that you said there were, and some of the reasons why you felt like it was important for you to file for Speaker of the House and declare that you were running, was your concerns over how the impeachment process and that whole situation happened and how Dade Phelan handled that situation and concerns members had about that. The issue of Democrat chairs, you mentioned one of your bills in particular that you felt like was thwarted because a Democrat was chairing a committee when the Republicans have had the majority in the Texas House for numerous consecutive legislative sessions. And, with the exception of 2009, I think it was 76-74, but still the majority in that case, even though it was pretty thin. And I'm sure there were other issues. Those were the two. Was there another one? There may have been three that you mentioned, but let's start with the one about the impeachment and how that was handled with Ken Paxton. Give us a little bit more detail, some of the things you shared that day on why you think that's one of the reasons why, the House has become dysfunctional.
Yeah, so to be clear, I'm sort of coming into this conversation, and my perspective is one that I was not there for the impeachment because my son was graduating from high school, and that was well known, that was well established.
Yeah, it was a Saturday. I remember that as well.
Yeah, it was one of my big frustrations about this is we had a whole session of conservative victory, and I remember going home and saying, if you're a social conservative, this was a great session for you. Nobody wanted to talk about that, of course, because all they wanted to talk about was impeachment. But the thing is,
and I want to say something real quick. I want to say something real quick, Dr. Oliverson, because the people have brought that comment to me. Oh, he was absent that day, and almost with a little bit of question. How convenient, these kind of things. I have a high school senior who's about to graduate. We don't get to pick when that graduation is, but I'm sure not going to miss it, right? So I appreciate you bringing up that detail.
Yeah, I appreciate you highlighting that. I mean, my family it comes first, and something like that. We're not talking about missing a soccer game here. This is a once in a lifetime thing, and I just wasn't going to miss it. And look, that was known. That was known weeks in advance. The Paxton thing dropped on all of us like an atom bomb with less than 72 hours before we were supposed to make a decision as to how we were going to vote on this. I've never understood, and in fact, there were several of my colleagues that gave very, I thought, reasoned speeches as to why they felt that this was a process that lacked a due process. And I'm not a lawyer, so I leave that to the lawyers. But it was concerning, and it was very, in my opinion, it was very close to the vest, very cloak and dagger. It sort of dropped like a bomb. And I, quite frankly, don't think that we had an ability to make an informed decision. I could not have voted for impeachment had I been there on the basis of having that limited window of time to examine the evidence and just take other people's word for it, essentially that, all the rocks had been overturned and that, this was the right way to go. And I know I wasn't alone. There were a lot of colleagues that just said, it's not a good process. And quite frankly, it's not a process that the House has used in the past when it's come to the impeachment of a statewide elected official, to sort of just slip it in. at the last possible second
Well,
like that.
I mean, who of us has any memory of the last time something like this happened? I mean, Tom
Yeah.
Craddock. I mean, I can't remember last time you had some, a statewide elected official, certainly not the attorney general, up for impeachment vote in the Texas House. And we're talking with Dr. Tom Oliverson, chairman, state representative from District 130, the northwest part of Houston. That district runs to the north of that line of 290 all the way up into Tomball. I think that it butts up right on that border of Montgomery County. And I remember that day too, because look, I remember the speech that some members gave that, may have felt one way or another about the attorney general and some of the allegations against him, but they focus a lot on process. And I remember we had not talked about that as an organization. In full disclosure, I did put out a tweet that day personally saying that if I was on the House floor, that I would be voting no. And a lot of my reasons were because of the, how quick things happened, the process side of it, and really the principle of the issue. And that was important to me. I did listen to speeches. I almost wanted to avoid it myself too, because there were just so many things tied to it. No one knew what was really going to happen. And so I said, I'm going to go in the chamber and I'm going to sit and I'm going to listen, because that's not been our focus as an organization. And I hadn't seen a lot of the information or any evidence to make an informed decision. And so I sat there and I listened to some of the speeches and I really let it pour over me. And I had a conversation with my kids about it, because I think a lot of people don't understand the principles that are different for us in America that you don't see in other countries. To your point, due process, right? Innocent until proven guilty and some of those kind of things. And so I was finding myself, this is a huge moment in Texas history and in our government. And that compelled me to say, I could not support, or I would not be voting for impeachment on the floor. But easy for me to say. I was on the floor, and members had a lot of other things they were dealing with. So I know that's been a concern that not only for you, but others. Let's talk about the Democrat chair issue. That's gotten a lot of attention. You mentioned that in some of your comments when you announced for Speaker of the House. Give us your insight on this issue and remind people, if they didn't hear your press conference, how you would handle this issue if you become Speaker.
Yeah, so to be clear, the second part first, I would say that if I am Speaker, we won't have Democrat chairs under my leadership. I'm going to expect that the majority functions as a majority. The majority holds itself together and holds itself accountable and holds its leadership accountable. And we don't run to Democrats as supporters in order to keep a Speaker in power. I just don't think that's the right mechanism for accountability, although that is traditionally what we have done. It's interesting that the vast majority of states actually have a majority rule type system and don't power share with the minority party as we do. And to my knowledge, there aren't any problems passing state budgets or doing important things. And so it's not like we're treading out into uncharted waters. We may not have ever governed this way before, but most other states do.
If the Democrats had the majority, do you think they would, hesitate for a moment or lose any sleep over saying all the chairmanships are going to be for Democrats? I mean, they could have a 76-74 majority, and I bet you they find a way to do that.
For sure. For sure. And
I don't think a lot of people will be surprised by that.
There are no states that are moving this direction, right?
Yeah.
So it's like I hear sometimes people say, well, Texas is setting a good example. Texas is leading the way. The reality is we're not leading the way on this issue. We're at the tail end of a revolution that happened quite a while ago in most other states. Most other states that have switched from Democrat rule to Republican rule have already dealt with this issue and moved on, and they're still able to get things done. I would say Arkansas is probably a good example that you could point to of a state where they went from being majority Democrat about the same time as we did to being majority Republican, and yet they have somehow moved on in their conversations to where the Republicans now hold the chairmanships. And the Democrats still show up to work. So, I mean, I just think it's a bad precedent, and it gets us into a lot of trouble, right?
Well,
whether it's
no, and look, the timing of it makes a lot of sense. We're talking with Texas House member Tom Oliverson, who is chair of House Insurance. He's now chair, we'll talk about this in a second when we run out of time, of the House Republican Caucus. But, look, there's been, for many sessions, there's been complaints among Republicans of, particularly in the House, why are there Democrat chairs? Why are there so many Democrat chairs? But we've also seen Republican grassroots members, if you will, through the RPT convention and others. This was a priority item, a legislative priority, even though it's not a legislative vote, if you will, to ban Democrat chairs, or a lot of, T-shirts that were printed. Republican voters that are very engaged have said, this is what we want. And so this is a good response from you as far as indicating you're listening.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Jonathan. And to be clear, I mean, I would say that I was one of the handful of House members that actually came to the RPT convention last time. I was on the floor. I was debating the platform from the back mic with our other grassroots members. Not particularly well attended by my colleagues, but I was there. And I remember telling my grassroots folks that I didn't think that the Democrat chair issue was a good platform priority, because it wasn't something that we could file a bill on or do. It was really more up to a leadership decision. But you're right. I mean, I watched with increasing frustration the way that some of my colleagues were treated, and even my own ability to move legislation. As I said, I had non-controversial bills that simply help paramedics provide health care in rural parts of our state that were killed by a Democrat chair because she wanted to send a message that she was angry that I was carrying SB 14. We give these folks power and we're surprised that they use it. But I don't see how anyone wakes up the day after the primary this time around and says that this is an issue that the grassroots don't really care about, or it's just a tiny fraction of the grassroots that are being agitated that care about. This is a major issue. And so I think if you're going to run for office and you're going to have the R behind your name and you're going to claim to represent conservative values, that you have to listen to the voters that put you in office. I mean, ultimately, you are accountable to them. And so if they're saying, this is the direction we want you to go, I just don't know how you ignore that and get away with it.
Well, you
and
have to. And in this case, you have to ignore it. You have to be deliberately going against such a strong, voice and percentage of voters. And you're going in a lot of ways, sort of, I don't know, common sense or something, what people would expect. I think they're surprised. Many people that are not involved in the process thought, wait a minute, Republicans have the majority, but they're still making Democrats chairs of all these committees. That doesn't make a lot of sense. So you would have to deliberately be going against that. And I've heard a lot of House Republican members complaining of that and sort of trying to be dismissive of that and suggesting as if, there's no way that we could ever do that because of some other logistical reason. Let's try to hit two more issues in the 2 minutes we have left, if we can. One of the things you got into substantively at your press conference was, someone asked, well, what would you prioritize moving forward if you're Speaker of the House? You said school choice.
Absolutely. School choice is an issue that's time has come. I think it's very clear that this is what the voters want to see, what they expect from us. And quite frankly, I think when you look at a lot of the issues that we're passing legislation on right now with regards to books and libraries and drag queens and gender mod in schools and various other, before that it was CRT and all of these things. I mean, I really think that choice and competition, which we see literally everywhere else, is a great antidote for a lot of that stuff. And the fact that we don't get the ability to choose in a lot of cases, that there are kids that can't escape failing school or escape failing school district, that's an issue whose time has come. And I think that is the other thing that you saw very clearly on primary day, is that there was some backlash against folks that maybe underestimated the degree of support in their district for school choice. So that would be my priority, and I would expect that we get that done quickly.
Well, look, and we would, I think,
this for 2 years.
Many people felt like we would have gotten it done before if, whether it's the speaker or leadership or whatever, would have either been more supportive or not thwarted it or whatever. And, look, I don't think Phelan has made it clear that he supports it, and I'm not convinced that he does. I mean, the evidence suggests that it wasn't a priority for him at the least, and I hear a lot of people suggesting it's not something he supported, and so it's, I think it's fair to place that responsibility in many ways on Dade Phelan with that not getting done, with I don't know how many special sessions, and the governor making it clear how important this issue was. He said it was an emergency item, and it couldn't even get done after 2 or 3 special sessions. Okay, I'm going to try to squeeze one other issue in. Gender modification and protecting kids from these dangerous puberty blockers and procedures is a big deal. There's a new report out. We got about 30 seconds. Cash report. What does it say? Why do we need to hear about it? And we will put a link up.
Yeah, the Cass report, I would invite everybody to read it. Hilary Cass is a United Kingdom healthcare researcher who was appointed by their health service to look at the way they were handling pediatric gender dysphoria issues and stuff like that. And so this is it's a 4 years in the making report that she issued. And she basically said a whole lot of things that you heard at the debate for SB 14, that there are a growing list of harms, that there's no evidence of real benefit, that the drugs that people say are reversible are really not reversible. We just found out recently that puberty blockers actually cause potentially testicular cancer in kids. And she said, which I thought the most fascinating thing she said is that, she's never seen an area of medicine where researchers have been more afraid to come forward and speak the truth about what their research says for fear of condemnation. That's not how science is supposed to work. That in and of itself is a huge red flag that the politics are overdriving the truth. And so Texas made the right call. I think the take-home point is that the Cass report confirms everything that we did and everything that we said last session when we passed this bill. And I know you guys were right there with us as we were working on it. And we were on the side of, I remember people said, well, history will prove you wrong. No. History is going to prove that we were on the right side here, and we were doing what was good and what was right for kids.
No, I agree. And as one of my colleagues that works on this issue said, it's an absolute scandal what's going on. The bullying, the cover-up, the coordinated efforts to really harm kids. There's no denying it. They cannot try anymore to try to suggest they're trying to do anything good. The information's been so clear and overwhelming how much damage this does to kids. And I'm so glad that you led the effort with Senate Bill 14 to protect kids from these harmful puberty blockers and gender transition surgeries and all these awful things. And now we continue to learn more and more of what the truth is through the Cash report and other things. And so we're so grateful for your leadership. We're out of time. Dr. Oliverson, State Representative Chairman Tom Oliverson, has been our guest today on the Texas Values Report. All right, I got one other thing to say. Go to txvalues.org. Make a tax-deductible donation today so we can continue this work and bring this information to you. That's how together we can protect faith, family, and freedom in Texas. And we'll talk to you next week on the Texas Values Report.